I have time to look at nature and appreciate it. I have time to look at, the small things in life, like, washing the dishes, appreciating the soap, the scent, like these small things in life that are in my everyday routine. I can think about that now in Korea.
Welcome to the Coffeeshop AU. I am Jay, your host. I am trans, non-binary, neurodivergent, and currently based in Seoul, Korea. My pronouns are they, them, and I believe that queer folks like me deserve more safe spaces to tell our stories our own way. And to help me do that, today I am joined by my friend Nine. Welcome, Nine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too.
Good. What are you drinking today?
I have a cup of black tea with me.
With milk?
No, just the tea.
Yeah, today's like kind of a chilly Saturday afternoon. Is it warm tea?
Yes, it's super hot. It's like extra hot tea.
Okay, good. Yeah, steaming cup of tea is like the best beverage for weather like this. I am drinking, by the way, some oat milk with like pieces of ghee floating on it. Because my aunt from New Zealand, she was visiting pretty recently and she brought this little bottle of ghee as a gift.
Oh.
I don't know why. She brought it as a gift for my parents, and then my parents were like, we don't want it. We don't know how to consume it. Why don't you have it? And I was like, okay, great.
Oh.
So I've been having it in my coffee in the morning. It's really good. I love how the tastes blend. So I had my coffee this morning with some ghee in it, and then I poured some oat milk into the cup, and now I have like leftover ghee. Yeah, it's like really great to keep my energy going without making me full, which makes me sleepy. So I feel like this is a good drink for me. Anyway, that was a whole tangent about my drink. Where are you joining us from today?
I am joining from Seoul, Korea. I live on the far eastern end of Seoul.
Right. And I live south. I wonder how far away we are from each other, because I've never been to your place.
Yeah.
And you've never been to my place.
I don't think we're too far. Like, compared to other places in Seoul, actually, I think it's easier to probably get to your place.
Yeah. So what we know about you so far is like your name's Nine, which is not your given name. But on this show, you will be known as Nine, and that you are joining us from eastern side of Seoul. What else can you tell us about you?
So I've been living in Seoul for about 3 years now. I think about 3 years. I moved here a little after the pandemic began.
Right.
Maybe not a little. I moved here like a year after the pandemic began.
Okay.
So I'm from the United States. I was born and raised on the East Coast of the United States, and I'm queer. My pronouns are she, they. And my parents are all from Korea. They're Korean immigrants living in the United States. So I grew up in a Korean family in the United States. When I first came to Korea, what I thought was interesting was that people would be surprised that I can speak Korean. Not because they thought I was Korean American, which that was the interesting part. Most people's default was that they thought I would have been an adoptee.
Oh.
So they were surprised that I was exposed to Korean, I guess, which was very interesting because that was so widespread. It was so like common for people to respond that way.
In Korea.
Yeah.
That is interesting. I just assumed that you grew up in a Korean family because the first time we met, you were speaking Korean. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to my experience of growing up abroad with a Korean family. And your Korean was very, very fluent. So I didn't just assume that you had been adopted. But that's so interesting.
Yeah, that wasn't just once or twice. It was just common.
Right. Just now, though, I have to point out, you said all my parents are from Korea. How many parents do you have?
I have 2 parents. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to clarify. I was like, oh, is there somebody else that I don't know about?
No, you're right. I could have more than 2 parents, but I guess just to clarify, yeah, because people would be surprised that even one of my parents were Korean. So my 2 parents.
So people just assumed.
Yeah, and I don't know how that began because I remember when I was living in Korea, and we'll probably talk about this later, when I was living here for a year before I like fully moved here, I didn't get that kind of response. So I don't know if it's recent or maybe just the people I happened to meet, had different guesses about me. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah, but both your parents are from Korea. They emigrated from Korea in the like 80s, 90s?
Yes, early 80s.
Early 80s, right. Yes, we will get more into that later on. Speaking of the first time that, like your first impressions and how people respond to you when they first meet you, do you remember when we first met?
Should I explain before that how I got to the place you were at? Or
Oh, yeah, sure. Give me your version of the story.
my version of the story is that I came to Korea in early 2021. So that was a little more than a year after the shutdowns happened in the United States.
Yeah.
So it was still pretty controlled in the US and Korea. But after my 2-week quarantine, so back then we had to do a 2-week quarantine, right? So as soon as my quarantine ended and I, tested negative and everything, I was able to go outside. And I think like the day after, I went to the place that you were working at.
You're talking about Pewda,
Right, yeah.
that sex toy store I was working at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to Pewda like the day after my quarantine ended, and I met Sherry. And I knew about Pewda back in the United States because during the quarantine, almost the entire quarantine, I was listening to the podcast that the other Pewda...
Yeah, okay, so let me just clarify some things. Basically, Pewda, where we met for the first time, is a sex toy store run by my two good friends who also happen to be married to each other. So one of them is an American woman called Sherry. The other person, she's a Korean woman called Hyeyoung. And they are, I guess, multinational lesbian couple who run this store together. And I was working at the store when Nine arrived in Korea. And they had been guests on this podcast show created and hosted by one of our mutual friends in this community that we're all a part of. So this show, spoken in Korean, features like the diversity of womanhood. In my opinion, that's my take on it. And because there are Korean people living like abroad everywhere.
Right.
I've met Korean people who are living abroad listening to the show, and it's their way of staying connected to Korean culture in a way. And so I am guessing that's similar to maybe what you were doing when you were in the States.
Right. Yeah, the podcast was really big for me. I guess it gave me like a sense of belonging or, like a sense of affinity with these people that I've never met before, but like, people who probably share similar values as me. And it really helped me a lot emotionally, I guess, through the pandemic. So as soon as my quarantine ended, I decided to go visit one of the frequent guests on this podcast.
Hyeyoung.
Yeah, well, so initially I wanted to meet Hyeyoung because she's like a frequent guest on the podcast, but that day she wasn't feeling well, so Sherry was at the shop. And then I talked to Sherry for like a good, hour.
Yeah, that's a pretty common experience when you walk into the store. You're like, vibrators, and you're like, ooh, a cool lesbian I can talk to.
Yeah, she was so friendly and knowledgeable, and like she wasn't trying to sell me anything in the store, right? Just like as another person from the United States telling me about cool things in Seoul, basically, like places I could find community, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then she was like, why don't you come back in 2 days when Hyeyoung will probably be back in the store? And I was like, oh, okay. And at the time, like, I just got to Korea. I didn't have a job or anything, so I had like a lot of time on my hands.
Sure.
So I went back like 2 days later, and I talked to her for like another 1 or 2 hours. And then, as we were talking, she found out that I was in Korea for filmmaking and acting.
That was your main interest.
Right. That was basically the main reason I came to Korea to like start my career. So at the time, I believe you were writing a script, right? You were writing a screenplay?
Probably. I did a lot of things at the time, and I don't remember now. But
that's what Hyeyoung said to me, too. Hyeyoung told me, you're doing a lot of different things, and one of those things is screenwriting.
I was interested in screenwriting, yes.
Maybe you two could get connected. Maybe I feel like you could be good friends. So, like 2 days later, I went back to Pewda. So that 1 week, I went like 3 times, right? And then I finally met you. Yeah, and that's how our friendship began.
Yeah. I know. It's interesting. I remember Hyeyoung telling me about you because I would pop into the store like all the time, even on the days I wasn't working because I lived in the neighborhood. And she was like, "Oh, Jay, like I met somebody that I think you would really get along with, and you know, she's from the States. She speaks Korean and English like you, and she's really into filmmaking." And I was like, "Oh, cool." But it was so random, you know? And I was like, I mean, I guess all connections are random if you think about it, but I was like, okay. And then she was like, I told her when you work, so she's gonna come and visit you on your next shift. And I was like, oh, okay. And then you showed up, and I found it quite interesting. Again, like I didn't just assume that you were an adoptee or like anything about your background. I just knew that you had come from the States and that you could speak English and Korean. Other than that, I just didn't really know what to go on. So I was a little awkward. I mean, I thought you were very interesting because some people who listen to the podcast that we mentioned, you know, they'll show up at the store. They want to talk to Hyeyoung and they just kind of want to see what the store is like. And sometimes they're disappointed to find me there instead.
Oh, really?
They're like, when is Hyeyoung working?
Oh, no.
Some people didn't mind, but some people are like, I really want to meet Hyeyoung.
Yeah.
So I would tell them when she worked. So I guess she just did the same for me. Except you weren't looking for me. She just, she was like, you should meet.
Yeah.
Also, I feel like it's worth mentioning that we've never spoken in English before to each other.
Right. This is very new.
This is very new.
Yeah.
This is the first conversation we're having with each other in English. And that's because when we first met, I asked you, you know, like, I'm comfortable speaking in English and in Korean, so let me know what you're more comfortable with. And you said, I don't mind. But you also kind of never spoke to me in English.
Right.
And you had this almost resolute look on your face when you said, I don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Which read to me like, I don't want to speak in English.
Oh, yeah.
So, because you said it to me in Korean in this firm tone, I was like, okay, maybe she doesn't want to speak in English. So we've only spoken in Korean since then. And I thought you were quite interesting because, like, who moves to a different country and then just, like, shows up? You know, like, what I was trying to say earlier is there are people who show up at the store wanting to talk to Hyeyoung or, you know, look around at the shop, but there are mostly people who already live in Korea. I just never met somebody who, like, moved from a different country. And this was like their first port of call almost. Like,
Yeah.
I've been listening to this podcast. Let me just go and check out these guys, which I think is wonderful. So I thought you were very, like, courageous. So I wonder if you have any other, like, recalls from that meeting.
Yeah, earlier I mentioned I spoke to Sherry the first time for an hour and then like 2 hours with Hyeyoung, right? And then I believe the first time I met you, we talked for like 4 hours, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
I think you stayed for 4 or 5 hours. What happened? I don't know. I don't even remember what we talked about, but it was just customary at the time. If somebody comes and they have like a personal tie to you, connection to you in some way, or they want to hang around a bit longer, then like we would put this fold out table next to the counter and they could just sit there and talk as I worked.
You know, honestly, I don't really remember what we talked about. I just remember it being a very long period of time, and I didn't realize that until I was leaving.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't know that much time had passed, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think I just felt comfortable as in, like, I could trust you and, like, you know. Yeah. But honestly, I don't really remember what we talked about.
Yeah, we must have talked a little bit about filmmaking and screenwriting since that was the
objective, but I don't know how much of
Yeah.
that actually happened. I think I talk more about TV shows and movies and film-related things with you now, but definitely not in the beginning.
Yeah. So we don't remember what we talked about, but we talked a lot. And from that time, like, you would just kind of drop in from time to time and then talk for another, like, 4 or 5 hours. You met my dad one time.
Yeah! At the shop, of all places.
At the store. My dad was also
Yeah.
hanging out at the store.
Yeah.
And the three of us were hanging out at the store. I feel like maybe on that day, during that particular moment, some customers coming in were like, what is going on? Now you are enrolled on a filmmaking course and you've recently wrote, produced, and directed and acted in a short film. And I know that you're going through this, like, editing process now, which is always tough. But I just admire that you're doing what you came here to do. You're following your passions. And you told me before that that was one of the reasons that you came to Korea. So I kind of want to know, where exactly were you in the States before you left? And what was life like before you moved?
Yeah, I was born and raised on the east coast of the United States, and the community I grew up in was technically a Koreatown, but that area, there's a lot of immigrants from like all over the world. So it was like an immigrant heavy area, I guess. So I guess my community was a lot of Latinx, Vietnamese, and Korean people.
Yeah.
And the schools that I attended happened to be like Asian and white.
Okay.
It wasn't super diverse, I guess. But yeah, that's the community I grew up in. Like I said, it was a Koreatown. We had very easy access to a lot of Korean media, Korean newspapers. We had a local Korean language radio station that was always playing in my house. Shops, restaurants, there was a lot of that. So I think growing up, my grandparents loved listening to the radio and they loved watching Korean shows. So my grandpa would go to the local Korean video store to bring videos every week. And back then in the 90s, in the early 90s, you had to go to a video store to watch Korean movies or TV shows. So I just grew up with a lot of Korean language around me, right?
Yeah.
And then even those television shows for children, my grandparents would rent that for me to watch as well. So that's what I grew up watching. I didn't have American television shows around me. So I had like virtually no English exposure until like 5 years old when I had to go to preschool.
Right.
My parents also liked watching shows too. So the TV was always on. The radio was always on. And then back then, my parents were a part of this Korean community. So I always had these like aunts and uncles around me, right? Talking to me in Korean. So I had basically no English knowledge at all until I was like 5 years old. And just being around so much Korean media, I think that just naturally shaped what I wanted to do, that I wanted to be a Korean speaking actor. Like before I even knew about movies, before I even knew what acting was, I think that just naturally pulled me towards the direction of wanting to be this person, performing in Korean.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that, but that makes a lot of sense. And then something you told me is that because you grew up speaking Korean until you were like school age, it was kind of a shock to you to start school and then suddenly have to start speaking English.
Yeah, so when I was 5, maybe it was 4, I don't know. I was supposed to go to preschool and I cried for like 3 days straight, like the entire school day. So I got kicked out. I got kicked out. They were like, your child isn't ready. Like some children can't adjust to new spaces. Like for me, like I could not adjust to that space. So they said, your child isn't ready, so you have to come back when she's a little older. And then when I was a little older, a few months later, I went back and I cried again. But the reason I stopped crying after days was I found a Korean friend. I found my target, right, of communication. So I found this girl who also spoke a lot of Korean, and she was like my best friend until she moved away.
Oh, sad.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing was I got super sick, so I couldn't go to school a lot after a while when I was in preschool. But when I was hospitalized, she actually sent me like a letter, or she made me a handmade gift.
After she moved away or when she was still at school?
She was like moving away, so she left the gift at the school so that when I come back, I could get the gift.
Oh.
Yeah, like being able to speak Korean, I think, was so important to me. And I didn't realize that until very, very recently, like probably less than a year ago.
Right.
Yeah, so I think I went to preschool and I really felt stripped of my language. Like I felt like something was being torn out of me when I could no longer speak Korean. Because literally in an instant, my world became all English speaking, right? In school. And I think that was so traumatic for me. And of course, I didn't think about that and I didn't understand that. But in recent years, as I was doing more thinking about myself, like for acting reasons, in acting classes, when we had to think about our personal timeline, that memory somehow like clicked and it really got to me.
Right.
So I didn't really think about this until recently, but yeah, my environment completely changed in an instant. And from then on, I guess I grew up like I don't want to say normal, but I grew up like an average Korean American kid, just going to an American school, an English speaking school environment, and then speaking Korean at home. Yeah.
Yeah. Those stories you told me about suddenly have to switch your language and having to speak a language that doesn't belong to your family's culture, and the trauma of that, and your experiences of like not being able to speak Korean at school, like later on, it felt kind of wrong to do that. I mean, we can get into it later, but it just really resonated with me. And I just feel like that's a huge part of a childhood experience growing up in a different culture. And I wonder if, that tied in any way with your experience as a queer person in the community that you're growing up in. Like you mentioned, you had Asian students at your school growing up and white students.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the things that I find really interesting about that, when you were talking about your school experience, aside from the language aspect of it, you told me that you didn't really feel like you suffered because of your ethnicity. You didn't feel like you had too much trouble with that side of your identity. That made me wonder, like, what was your experience like as a queer person? Did you feel like you had any community of queer people around you? Were there opportunities to explore that side of yourself while you were still at school?
I don't think queerness and my ethnicity overlapped when I was growing up. I think they were two separate things for me. To begin with, the queer part, I didn't realize that I was queer until like my mid-20s.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure there were moments where, there were definitely moments like of queerness when I was growing up, but I never thought about it or realized that when I was growing up. So I don't think it was a conscious part of my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of ethnicity, because there were so many Korean people, it was such a Korean heavy community, I didn't feel like I didn't realize racism when it happened to me. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's probably, there definitely were moments of like, is it microaggression? I don't know the...
microaggression, yeah.
Yeah, those subtle moments, but there wasn't anything that, hit me really, really strong.
Uh-huh.
During the pre-interview, I told you that I didn't really have a hard time because of my ethnicity, but I did. I did, like thinking back, I did.
Yeah. I was surprised when you said that because that was not expected, but... Sure, yeah, could continue.
It's not something I thought about every day, but there were subtle moments. Those things people said in passing that hurt me, and it definitely damaged my entire day. It ruined my entire week.
Yeah.
That's the reason I couldn't act in the US. I realized from middle school or even elementary school, I can't act here. I can't pursue acting here because I would take acting classes and I would be like the only Asian kid. I told you that our community was there was a lot of Asian students in my school, but in theater classes, it was just me. It was just me, maybe one other kid, and I felt so out of place there because, as I mentioned, I grew up in such a Korean heavy, Asian heavy environment. Being that isolated was probably one of the first times in my life. In theater class. It was like all white kids. And when we were doing acting exercises, like improv exercises where I would do something like completely from myself, not from a script, I could sense kids like laughing at me because what I was doing was probably not common in white culture. I don't know what it was. I don't even remember what moment.
Right. I totally get that because I also took drama when I was doing my A-levels.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like high school level. And I was really uncomfortable. The entire school was white. I was literally the only Korean student at most of the schools that I'd gone to. And I know exactly the feeling you're talking about, where you just do something and that's natural to you and that's natural to the people from your culture. But all the white folks are like, what are they doing?
Yeah, exactly.
You know that it's not translating,
Yeah.
There's no cultural understanding between what you're doing and what they understand to be quote unquote normal. So yeah, I understand that discomfort like a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, there was that. And I really felt like the teachers didn't want to help me grow in my craft. One time I went to a summer camp, like an arts camp, and I took an acting class, and my teacher was this white guy, right? This white theater guy. And he literally had no interest in me.
That should be like a character. A white theater guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I felt so lost and like so alone because he would, coach other kids, right? But he didn't even like, say anything mean to me. I was just like invisible in that class, right? I had no guidance whatsoever. And then I also joined the school musical in middle school, and I just realized I couldn't sing. Like, I had no singing experience. I'm an awful singer. I had no idea how to make these musical like sounds come out of my body, and I didn't know how to do any of the moves because it's musical theater, so you have to do dance. And the teachers were just like, "Oh, you're doing fine," and I wasn't doing fine. Like, I was awful. Like, I was standing there like a stick, right? But they had no interest in helping me, and I think that's when I felt I can't be here. I have to go to Korea if I want to be an actor. Like, there's no option for me here. So yeah, from then on, I didn't pursue any performing arts, like theater arts. I didn't pursue any theater arts, any film after that. I just stopped everything and I just studied like a quiet Asian child in my school. I just lived up to the stereotype. I just did my work. I just went to college in a non-arts field.
Right. I'm sad to hear that. And like everybody, there is this stereotype of Asian kids, like the model minority, going into the STEM field. And I feel like what's not talked about, the sad truth, reality behind that stereotype is also this lack of access and support for kids of Asian backgrounds or some sort of racial minority backgrounds to pursue other things. More creative fields in their interests and passions. So can you tell us a little bit about like what you did instead? What you ended up going into for a job?
Yeah, so I stopped trying any extracurriculars or anything theater or film related. But when it came time to go to college, I was looking at film studies programs.
Okay.
But I didn't have a portfolio. I had nothing prepared to go to an arts program for college. And senior year, our curriculum was government. So it was basically studying the government, studying like different social issues in school. And I thought that was really interesting. So I decided to go towards political science.
Okay.
Completely different from what I'm doing now. But so I applied to an Asian studies program for university. And I had zero knowledge on like Asian American, Korean American, like that kind of vocabulary knowledge was just not in me at the time. So I thought Asian studies was all the same thing. So I just went to like any school with like Asian something in it. And I happened to go to an Asian studies program. And the college I went to was like, the kids were all so ambitious. People would start interning like their first semester of freshman year. So I felt pressure to do something as well. So I happened to go to different nonprofit organizations that do Asian American organizing. And I didn't know that that was so different from my major. But I interned at this one place, and that happened to later be my first job out of college. So yeah, I was an organizer from the time I interned to the time I quit my job. That entire time with that organization was about 5 years. But I was a full-time organizer for like 2.5 years.
Yeah. And it was an organization that helped immigrant populations in the Asian community.
Right. It was an immigrant rights organization.
And when you told me your experience of working at the organization, because whenever I hear like, oh, I worked at let's say a human rights organization or some sort of organization geared towards social justice, I always have like so much respect and my eyes all become twinkly and I have so many questions, and then you told me it was a terrible experience. Can you tell us just a little bit about like why that was not a great experience for you?
I think the biggest thing was the hypocrisy and, just the working conditions. Like, it's a human rights, social justice organization, right? But the working conditions for the employees, the pay, the overtime was just ridiculous. And it was hard to speak your mind. The people who had been in the organization for decades had such a stronghold. It was harder for younger staff to, share their critiques or, share their opinions, share their suggestions.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm not an immigrant, right? My parents are immigrants, but I was born in the United States, so I wasn't an immigrant. But my friends who were immigrants and, told their stories or like participated in the campaigns, they had a really hard time as an impacted person. Just watching a lot of people have such a hard time made me think differently about how organizing should be done.
Right.
Like how social justice should be pursued, basically. And then later I realized it's not just the organization I was working at. Just the nonprofit industry has a lot of problems. And I realized it wasn't just me. It was happening in several other nonprofits across the country. So yeah, it just made me think about how to approach social justice in a more humane way.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about why the impacted people who participated in campaigns, like how they suffered?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to speak about that because I wasn't directly going through it, but
Yeah.
just from a friend's perspective, I could tell people having to share their stories as an impacted person, share their stories publicly, having to do that repeatedly, and that being so expected of by the organization really took a toll on their mental health, I think. I'm not sure. It's hard for me to speak for them.
Yeah.
I think that was difficult, and also just the way the organization uses those stories. Like the older staff would literally say, oh, let's use this person's story. Let's use them for this campaign. And that kind of vocabulary just hurt me every time. But that's so normal. That kind of vocabulary is just so normal in the nonprofit world that...
It felt like exploitative a bit.
Right. It's very exploitative.
Right. So I know that this is not a question like we talked about before. If you don't have an answer for this, it will be totally fine. What do you think could be done differently so that these campaigns can be done in a more humane way that doesn't hurt the people that are trying to help?
I don't have a clear answer for that, but just the attitude of, I don't know, I think it's just having so much pride in your work that you're not thinking about the people who are actually having to do the work. You know what I mean? So you have so much pride in the mission, in this mission for social justice, and that you are an organizer, that you're not seeing how people feel. Like just being more sensitive to how people feel. I think even that little bit of sensitivity can really change the discussion and change the direction of these movements. That just wasn't present, so it made things hard for a lot of people.
Yeah. As a person that knows next to nothing about being involved with non-profit organizations, I think it's just important to hear these sides of the story as well. Not just this like shiny idea of, oh wow, look at this like selfless organization or selfless group of people trying to help these people with disadvantages. Because maybe this is too much of a general statement, but with anything that people do, like there's going to be flaws and things that don't live up to the ideal. So yeah, I just appreciated that you shared this honestly with me. It was not what I expected to hear. A lot of things that you've shared with me, I just wasn't expecting. So you left that line of work and you came to Korea. And it was during the first time you came to Korea to live here for about a year or so before going back and then coming back again this time. You told me that it was during that first time that you first had this realization of your orientation as a queer person. So would you mind telling us about that?
Yeah, so I, like I mentioned, because I was in an immigrant rights organization that was, working with many other different social justice organizations, there were a lot of queer people around me and in my community, but I never saw myself as a part of that community. I always thought I was an ally. So I didn't realize my queerness until I came to Korea. And what happened was that I was involved in this theater company when I was here for about a year. And at the theater company, maybe a month before I went back to the United States, so at the very, very end of my stay in Korea, I was doing this show and one of the actors was late. So she was running late, and as a assistant director, I had to coordinate with the actors. And what happened was I got this rush of worry all of a sudden. Like I was like panicking, right? I was so worried that if she comes late, she might get in trouble with the director, and like all these mix of emotions were happening to me. So as she was coming to the performance site, I was texting her nonstop. Oh, like today's stage is going to look like this. These are the changes in the actor's movements. This is blah, 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 blah. And I kept updating her nonstop. And after the show, I think I just immediately realized that this wasn't worry. This wasn't worry from a coordinator's point of view. This was like a queer, like a romantic emotion. I had feelings for this person. And yeah, I didn't really have a period where I had to figure out my sexuality. I think it just immediately came to me. Yeah, in that moment.
It's really interesting to me that when you're growing up, you didn't really have queer people's presence around you.
Not a lot, yeah. I mean, there probably was, but it wasn't, nobody like came out to me. So like, I didn't know. And like I had a queer friend in high school, but, and that wasn't something that I was aware of. It was me. Like I wasn't aware of that when I was growing up. So it wasn't until I went to college that I started to, you know, have more queer friends. It became a part of my world.
Right. So, like, when you were growing up, even though there might have been queer people around you, you just weren't aware of queerness as a thing.
Right.
Which, honestly, I can identify with because it was even less talked about back then when we were growing up than it is now.
Yeah.
And so we just never had the opportunity to even think about it. And even if we saw queer people around us, like, it was very hard to see it in ourselves.
Right.
So as you grew up, you had more queer people around you, but you still didn't connect it back to yourself.
Yeah.
Until you were in this theater group and you got so worried about this one actor.
Yeah.
I found it really cute. You just really wanted to like support this person, and then you realize like, wait a minute, I might have feelings for her.
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really cute because you also said your first impression of her was really negative. Like you didn't like her at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this also has to do with like me being from the United States, living in Korea, but like when people find out that I'm not from Korea, they immediately want to ask me about speaking English, if I can speak English well, or they'll say hi to me like in English. And that just annoyed me, right? And
I think I might have been guilty of that when we first met too. I think I tried to speak to you in English at some point and you just shut it down. And I was like, okay.
No, but that's different because I knew you also grew up in an English-speaking country, so I think that's different. But
got it.
When people just are like, "Oh my gosh, you're a foreigner," you know what I'm saying, right? Like it's completely different.
I get that.
This particular actor, she would say hi to me in English, and it annoyed me so much, right? So like I just had such a negative first impression of her,
right?
But yeah, I don't even know why I was attracted to her all of a sudden. Like I don't know what it was, but something happened and. She wasn't a very good person. Like she wasn't somebody that I wanted to be with, right? You know. So
she wasn't, or she was.
As a human being, wasn't somebody I wanted to be with, and I realized that later. But
I love that. I love that. Like I had a huge crush on this person. Not a good person. We can all relate to it.
Yeah, not a good person. But I am thankful for that moment. Because it helped me realize who I was. And now queerness is such a big part of me. It's a big part of my life. Yeah, I can't imagine my life without this queer part of me now.
Right.
So if I didn't have that, I don't know what kind of person I would be like right now. Like I would be a very different person.
Actually, that's such a great point. You know, like if I still was unaware of my own queerness, like I don't know what kind of person I would be. That really resonates with me. And I think about this quite regularly as well these days because, I mean, as you can see, you know, this entire project comes from queerness, and queerness is what ties everything together. And every time I'm prepping for an interview or, you know, thinking of the next person to interview or just think about my life in general, how I am interacting with the world and the communities I'm involved with, I do wonder, like, wow, like, what kind of life would I have right now if I hadn't come to realize all the things I know about myself now and take a lot of pride in? And I think for me, it was kind of difficult growing up abroad, looking different, presenting differently, and not really being understood in that way. Nobody really understood where I grew up, what Korean culture was. A lot of people didn't know where Korea was when I had first.
Yeah.
Like, literally, this one girl said to me, "Oh, I know Korea. Isn't that a city in Japan?" And I was like, "What?" I just didn't even respond to that because I was so shocked. I mean, we were also young. I can understand a person having a terrible grasp of geography because sometimes I'm not so great with that either. But that's not the case anymore. I feel like when you go abroad to an English-speaking country and you mention Korea, most people know that Korea is a country.
Right.
There are two Koreas and all this stuff, and K-pop, of course, Hallyu. But because there was such a gap in understanding of where I come from and where I know myself to be from and where I was living and the people looking at me, not seeing me for who I was, seeing me as a foreigner, and my feeling this pressure of having to act a certain way and also like contain a lot of things just to protect myself because I couldn't allow myself to be vulnerable. Even, with the acting story, to really be good at acting, I think you need to learn how to be vulnerable.
Right.
And you can't do that when you are seen as this perpetual sort of foreigner, an alien. And I felt very alien from myself.
Yeah.
So I remember us having a conversation about, I think I was the first one to tell you that we're talking about identities and all this stuff. And I was telling you that, I identify as non-binary and pansexual, but I really didn't seriously get to delve into those aspects of myself until I arrived in Korea and I could at least blend in that external way. I still don't feel fully Korean, to be honest, culturally, because I spent so long away from Korea, but at least in Korea, I don't look foreign, and I can speak fluent Korean.
Yeah.
So nobody treats me any differently until they get to know me a little better and they understand that my cultural understanding of Korean as a Korean person is a little different from their understanding.
Yeah.
So that made me feel safe enough to actually pay attention to these other parts of myself and be okay. Like, these were a lot of internal workings out after I arrived in Korea, and I didn't have to explain myself to every single person. Like, nobody was asking, where are you from? Some people were, but only if we were speaking in English. So it gave me more room to explore these different sides of myself inside. And then I remember you saying to me at the time, and you might not remember this, but I remember you saying, I have a Korean friend who grew up elsewhere who told me the same thing. After they arrived in Korea, moved back to Korea, they went through this process of really fully realizing their queerness. And I just find it interesting that maybe you don't see it that way. Maybe it's not the case. But I just find it interesting that your first queer awakening was also in Korea with someone you didn't even like. That just makes it more human and real. So yeah, I don't know. That just makes me feel connected to other queer folks' stories, especially, if they have a third culture background. You know what I mean? Just having those multi-layered experiences of being othered and then a change of environment helping you realize certain things that you just didn't see in yourself.
I think you hinted at this in our pre-interview, but I didn't fully understand the story that you heard from me.
Okay.
But now that I hear it in English, it makes sense again. I don't know.
Okay.
But
oh, wow.
Yeah, so something's clicking, but in Korea, I definitely had more headspace to think about my queerness. In the US, I have a lot of other things to think about. I was living with my family, so I had more responsibilities and other things that I had to think about, right? So I just couldn't think about myself. But now, because I'm living in Korea alone, I have the space to actually think about who I am as a person.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge, thinking more about my queerness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and being in the United States, maybe it's because I was involved in an organization that deals with, immigrant rights and racial justice, but I really only thought about me and the identity of Korean American. And it just kept growing in me that I don't feel comfortable being called Korean American, but I didn't really think about other parts of me. Being in Korea, I've kind of graduated from thinking about my ethnicity. I have to think about other aspects of my being, right?
Right.
I have to think about my health, my like physical body, like
Yes.
what is comfortable, what I can't do, what are my limits. I can think about that now. In Korea, I can think about being queer. I can go to, queer events and not feel like somebody might recognize me. That's definitely a luxury for me. I know that's a huge barrier for a lot of people, but in my case, I don't have to worry about being outed because I don't have that many connections. Because I'm not from Korea. That's big. And this began during the pandemic when I was just at home in the US, but I have time to look at nature and appreciate it. I have time to look at, the small things in life, like, washing the dishes, appreciating the soap, the scent, like these small things in life that are in my everyday routine. I can think about that now in Korea. So it's been huge on thinking about my queerness and just me as a person.
Yes. I mean, I feel you. I really feel you. And I love that phrase that you used, graduate from thinking about my ethnicity. That really hits home for me because I think that's exactly the right phrasing that I would use to describe my experience after arriving in Korea as an adult and for the first time not having to think of myself as an ethnic minority, like, oh, I'm Asian, I'm East Asian in a white majority society.
Yeah.
I realized that that's how I was viewing myself the entire time I was living in England, which is where I used to be. And how much of that filter, that lens, I was looking through when I was thinking about myself and sort of censoring myself all the time when I was in public or even in private. And it, like you said, it just doesn't leave a lot of room to think about yourself in other ways, free from that. And just what you said about noticing the small things in life and really being able to enjoy that. That's really beautiful. We all want that. We all need that. But it's also, that space being freed up can lead to all these other discoveries, which also lead to other joys and other freedoms that I think everybody should have. So that's really lovely to hear that you've been able to have that experience. And I think it's also worth noting that when we were doing our pre-interview, you told me that maybe because of the hesitation that I sensed in you when we first met in communicating verbally in English. So I was like pretty cautious not to do that with you. I wanted to respect those boundaries. If you just, for whatever reason, you only wanted to communicate in Korean, like I could do that. That's within my power to do that. So I felt like we stuck to that.
Thank you.
Of course. And I have to say, out of all my acquaintances, connections, friends who used to live a long time overseas and they can speak English, I don't really speak in Korean with that many people who have those backgrounds. And so it's always sort of like been at the back of my mind whenever I meet you. I'm like, okay, she doesn't want to use English. Like, let's just be careful. And then you told me something about that connected to your like preschool sort of experience of that being a very traumatic experience for you. And so I was a little concerned. Like, oh, but we're going to be doing this entire interview in English. Was that going to be okay for you? And then you were like, yeah. It's like, that's okay. But it's just hitting home for me right now that us processing this in English together, that's like bringing up more things for you. And I think that's very, I don't know, is significant in some way that maybe I'll process later on.
I think speaking in English is helping me process things, like in my brain. But it's really hard for me to talk right now. And I'm realizing I've been feeling this since this interview began, but I haven't spoken to you in English before. So all the conversations we had were in Korean, right? So I'm having a really difficult time just finding the right vocabulary, finding the right phrases to want to express what I said before.
Yeah.
And also this kind of connects to me coming to Korea. I didn't think about like myself or my queerness or anything until I came to Korea, right?
Yeah.
And by the time I came to Korea, I was speaking a lot of Korean. So like when I write journals, I would write it in Korean. A lot of this processing about myself happened in Korean.
I see.
And when I came to Korea, I talked more about myself with the new friendships that I made in Korea.
Yeah.
So all these conversations happened in Korean for me until today. So now
Right.
I'm trying to translate everything in my brain as I try to respond to your questions.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, this is a first for me, almost.
Right. Oh, wow. Well, I feel honored. It didn't occur to me that maybe this would be the first time that you'd be thinking about this in English and sort of framing this using the English language. I think it's also kind of new to me. And in my recent conversations with my friends who are a bit more aware of the dynamics, a lot of different cultural, racial dynamics they experienced growing up, they are teaching me the vocabulary and ways to talk about it together without feeling so afraid and feeling like I'll be judged or punished. So I'm also trying to find the right vocabulary. But when we were speaking in Korean about your experiences of growing up and having to learn, really transition very hardcore into English as a young kid, the feelings that you were describing of as you grew up, you felt like it was a bad thing to speak Korean at school.
Yeah.
And you started having these fears of speaking in Korean in public. Like, I just identified with that so much. And I kind of wanted to, if you're comfortable, like, hear you describe that experience for our listeners. Because I think it's really a very significant and important part of growing up in a different culture. And it's very relevant to what we're finding a little bit like, oh, this is all new for us. And like, we've never spoken about this in English before. And all of this.
Yeah, so going back to that experience in preschool, and I stopped crying because I found a Korean friend. At that time, speaking Korean and just completely ignoring all the teachers was fine. Like, I had no trouble doing that. I was like, just completely ignoring the entire world and only talking to my friend in Korean was fine. But as I went into kindergarten and elementary school, I just naturally only spoke English in school. And like I mentioned, there were a lot of Korean students in my school. So sometimes me and the other Korean kids would say like one or two words in Korean because it's cool, right?
It is cool.
Like you have that sense of connection. Yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like some real like close connection that you feel with this person.
Yeah.
Whether you like the kid or not, that you can share like that one or two words
Yes.
in Korean. So we would just like, joke, play around, or just like say something in passing. And that was fine. And I don't have a clear memory of what happened, but I think somebody said, like a teacher told us, like, you can't speak other languages. Like in school, please only speak English. But I don't remember the exact situation. I don't know where this like, feeling of fear came from, but at some point in elementary school, I realized I am not allowed to speak Korean in school. And from then on, like, I really, really, like, paid attention to, I was alert about what words were coming out of my mouth and, like, making sure everything was in English. Yeah, and, like, some underlying fear was in me that I shouldn't speak Korean. Yeah, from elementary school. And starting in like middle school, high school, there were a lot of students coming from Korea. So they were like here to study, I guess, or their families were moving from Korea. But there were a lot of students who like recently just came to the United States, so their English wasn't very good and they were more comfortable speaking in Korean. And I remember like, I don't know what it was, but at some point in high school, I was like, I'm going to rebel against the system and I'm going to speak Korean whenever I want, like with my friends. And yeah, I spoke a lot of Korean, I think, in high school with other Korean friends. And no teacher, like came after me. Nobody like said anything to me. But for some reason, I felt like I had this incredible power in my hands to like, rebel against all these teachers who were watching over me. Yeah, but I still don't know where that fear came from. And when I think about it, I used to go to Korean school in elementary school on the weekends. And there, at Korean school, our teachers would be like, oh, please try not to speak English because we're, here to learn Korean, right? But I just remember me and like all the other kids, we just kind of ignored that. And we're like, well, I don't know how to say this in Korean. We'll just like speak English.
Yeah.
And like we would ignore that. But on the opposite side, in American English speaking school, we were like scared, right? I don't know where this fear began. I don't know how it happened that way.
Oh, I'm sure. Like, first of all, that's very confusing for children to, like, here you only speak this language, here you only speak this language. And, like, children can't keep things together even when everything is, like, perfect and everything is very clear and ordered or whatever. Like, that's not how children are. So when you're just learning a language or two languages or whatever, you're just learning in life. Than to be told, like, these are the rules. And then I'm sure there was other stuff you're taking in, maybe not consciously, but stuff you see in the news, around you, how different people are treated in society. And I'm sure that you just soak these things up as a kid. And I'm speaking from my own experience of, having moved to the UK when I was pretty young. And, I also used to speak Korean with my brother all the time at first.
Yeah.
And we would go shopping. We'd go to like a supermarket or something, and on the street, we would just speak Korean because that was our language. And then as we got more used to speaking English, and it was really hard to learn the language too, because when you're learning a different language, you're not just learning the language, you're learning the culture as well. You're taking in all of the culture that's in the language. So it's very much like switching between cultures too, when you switch between languages.
Yeah.
And I really related so hard when you said this fear was inside me of speaking Korean in public. I was like, I had that fear too. And it wasn't like somebody came up to us and said, don't speak Korean. Like, I've never had that experience.
Yeah.
But the older I grew and the more English I could speak, and I understood how Asian people, East Asian people in particular, were looked at in the society I was living in, I could feel all the stares that people were giving us when I would speak Korean with my mom outside, because her English improved a lot more slowly than ours did, because she didn't spend the majority of her time with other English-speaking people like we were. And those kind of stares made me feel very unsafe and very like I'm drawing attention to myself, and I feel like they're suspicious. I feel like, they don't like it when I speak a language they don't understand. And so just to feel safer, I think, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a conscious process, but I also stopped speaking Korean with my brother in public at home. It just became normal for us. And so when you told me that story, I was like, yeah, I love that you felt like you had this amazing power just by speaking in Korean with other Korean students at school. In school. Going against the rules.
Yeah.
And when you're a student, school rules, teachers, that's like a big deal.
It is a big deal. Yeah.
That's the authority structure you live under.
Right.
So I really love that you felt that way. And then I said, doing this podcast, for me, it feels like a big rebellion to be talking about these experiences with you and other friends of mine who've gone through these experiences in English, in the English that we were taught to use, and has all these oppressive vocabulary to describe anybody who's not white, who's not of that culture, and like, hey, look, we can talk about this experience, but it's a lot to process too, right? I mean, I did a lot of my processing after arriving in Korea, racially and gender, sexuality-wise, in English, because I just always had English-speaking friends in my circles. I feel very fortunate in that a lot of them were non-white English-speaking friends who understood my experience, and they gave me that language to speak about it. But I still feel a bit scared talking about racism or queerphobia, all this stuff in English, because I'm like, well, I can do this in Korea because a lot of people don't speak English in this way. But what if I was in a different country? So yeah, there's a lot to it. I feel like we are going to be doing like a different whole other episode on this topic. But I really want to thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure there are lots of people who can identify with this kind of experience. And yeah, it's just important. We're rebelling together. Okay, so I remember something funny about our assumptions of each other when we first met. Because maybe it wasn't on our first meeting, but like a little bit after we started to get to know each other, and I shared with you, I'm non-binary, blah, blah, blah. You told me that you have a trans sibling. And the way you put it was just so casual. I was like, oh yeah, my sister is also trans, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, huh. I just had a moment of like, she has immigrant parents, like, she grew up overseas, and then she came back to Korea, and this just seems so, like, every day for her, which is a weird way to put it, but you know what I mean? Like, it was such a non-issue, and it was just kind of, like, smooth introduction into, like, I have a trans sibling, and I was like, huh, okay, all right. That's kind of cool to know. I was just a little surprised or taken aback by how casual you were about the whole thing. Yeah, and then you said, oh, thank you for seeing me as a conservative person, because everybody thinks that just because I'm from the States, I like to go clubbing and I'm like crazy and like out and, extreme.
Yeah, I really appreciated that when you said you were surprised about my younger sibling. Like, I think you said that you thought, I don't remember. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like...
It's okay. I can spit them out if they're not right.
People who grow up in an immigrant family be a little more conservative, or, I think you said something like that. And that was so comforting to me. I was like, oh my gosh, finally someone sees me as conservative. Like, now, like, this is one of the things I've graduated from since living in Korea. But when I came here the first year, I got so much of that. Like, oh my gosh, what is it like in the US? How different, how cool is it to be a US citizen? Like, I got so much of this, like, you're such a cool foreigner. You're so lucky to be an American. And I hated it. Like, I absolutely hated every time somebody came up to me like that. And the other assumption was that since you're from the US, you must be so open-minded, and, you must, like, you must be on, like, all hugs and whatever, like, free hugs all the time. I'm like, no, I'm not like that, right?
Yeah, and lots of cleavage, lots of ass crack, just, like, all of the...
Like, I don't know how, like...
Skin showing.
What image people have about me, but, like, the fact that somebody didn't see me as so open and, free was so, like, comforting to me.
Even though it's like a different context. I made me laugh when you said that. Like, thank you for thinking that I was conservative.
Yeah, I was like, thank you.
Finally. But that's just like the image of people who immigrated a few decades ago, that immigrant society. Because I met people who also immigrated in the 70s, 80s to the UK. And I did find some conservatism in that community. And my mom was just like, I can't breathe. It's like time stopped. I just remember that. So that's probably why I was a little surprised.
But yeah, I remember in that moment when I just said in passing that I have a trans younger sibling. I also knew you were queer by that point. And I know that you knew I was also queer, but you seemed like so surprised, like not uncomfortable, but so surprised. I was like, why are they surprised? Like, we're all queer people.
Are they trans?
Why are they surprised about somebody being trans? I just I didn't want to I don't know. I was like, maybe there's some other meaning. I just let it go. But
yeah. You didn't, but it's so funny to me that we had this mutual moment of like, what? And you're like, what?
Confusion at each other.
Yeah, confusion. And how the other person was sort of handling this fact. So I'm glad that I wasn't the only one who felt the awkwardness. Because, I like it when people can read my reactions. Because as a neurodivergent person, sometimes... people tell me that they don't know what I'm thinking or feeling. I think I'm pretty honest about my reactions, but sometimes my face is not doing what I think it's doing. So I'm glad that you were able to pick up on that. I'm glad that we're talking about it because you could have jumped to conclusions. Are they transphobic?
Transphobic, yeah.
I mean, it happens. Internalized transphobia is real. So,
right.
It would have been so weird if me with my completely shaved head at the time I was bald probably when I met you.
Yeah.
And I was wearing super baggy clothes. I was so uncomfortable with anybody reading me as a woman or a femme person. So for me to go what? That would have been a little strange. Anyway, that kind of left an impression on me because I don't think I even really said anything to that. I was like, oh, okay. And then we just had a few conversations about how your sister's handling everything or like what her situation is. And I remember every time you would come back, you would just kind of casually mention her again. And it was just so refreshing to me to see a Korean person. I think this is what it was. To see a Korean person being so nonchalant about the fact that they have a trans sibling and just talking about it. And like not oversharing, or I never felt like you weren't respecting her boundaries or anything. I've never heard another Korean person talk about their trans sibling in any way before. And you were the first person to do that around me. And I met your sister, and we've met each other's families. Like, we don't meet up that often, but you've met my dad, and I've met your sister, who like doesn't even live in Korea. Yeah, when I was thinking about interviewing you, it really came up for me that because you're the first person to talk to me about this, and you're probably the only person I've ever talked to about having a trans sibling, I really wanted to ask your experience of having a trans sibling, and from a sibling's perspective, because I'm trans, I have a cis sibling, and I've never asked him what his experience of watching me go through this journey was, what it's like for them, because we don't ask each other these things. We're Korean.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, sorry. I was scrolling through my chats with my younger sibling. Just to clarify, my sibling is non-binary trans.
Okay.
And their pronouns are she, they.
Okay.
And they prefer sibling to sisters.
Okay.
So I think for a time I introduced them as my sister, but now just sibling, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, my non-binary trans younger sibling, since they were born, my family and I, we realized queer aspects of my sibling. But like my family didn't have an understanding of queerness, right?
Sure.
Like those conversations just weren't around, and I just don't think my parents knew, right? Until recently. About like the queer community. So I also didn't have that knowledge or that vocabulary in my mind, but I think we just all knew that we could sense it, right? So it wasn't surprising when my younger sibling like officially said, oh, I'm gonna start transitioning.
At least to you, it didn't feel new.
Yeah, I don't know about my parents, but for me, it wasn't surprising. It wasn't new. It wasn't anything. And I don't even remember the moment. I don't think there was a coming out for my sibling. It was just so already understood, like unspoken but understood, like many Korean conversations. Yeah.
Korea is a very high context culture.
Yeah, it was just a lot of 눈치, just sensing things, but...
눈치, yeah.
Yes.
Just, you gotta, like, feel it out.
Yeah, you just feel it.
You just kind of gotta know. And if you don't, then you're just lacking in 눈치, and there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, you're just not sensitive enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the coming out moment. I'm pretty sure there wasn't one. There was no moment of declaration of I will do this.
Right.
I just remember in passing, oh, I'm gonna start hormones, I'm gonna whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question. I just don't think there was like a particular moment. It was just very natural, like when we were growing up, and then when it, I guess, quote unquote officially became official. Like, I don't even know when that moment was.
Okay. So it sounds like for you it was just a very natural process of, oh yeah, I always knew that you weren't cis, and that's just an understanding that you had. Was there a moment when your sibling asked for you to use different pronouns for them, and that was like something you registered as being a bit more of a formal thing, or did it not feel like that at all?
I don't know if it was pronouns. I don't think it was pronouns. So I didn't think about queerness until way later.
You mean for yourself?
Yeah, for myself.
Yeah.
So, like, just watching my younger sibling grow up, like, I didn't have any awareness. I didn't have any of this vocabulary, and I just wasn't sensitive to it. But I remember when my siblings said that they were starting hormones, it was, like, the week of their college final exams, and they were like, oh, I have to study for exams. Everything's just so painful. Like, I'm so happy about the hormones, but, when you first start, you have that transitioning period, right? Like, adjustment period. And I remember them saying something was painful, or I don't remember what it was, but I was like, why did you do that now? And in hindsight, that's very insensitive of me to say that. And me now, I wouldn't say that. But back then I was like, why didn't you time it correctly? I remember saying, like, making all these insensitive questions. There was that. And I'm sure, I know that I've said so many insensitive things, right, to my younger sibling without knowing that I shouldn't be saying things like that. But now, maybe because I became aware of my queerness, I thought more about it and I tried to be more careful about it to myself and to others.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know how to end that sentence.
No. I mean, that's totally understandable. And I think that's why I was really keen to hear your perspective on your experience as a sibling to a trans sibling. Because, like you said, you actually came into an understanding of your own queerness later on.
Yeah.
And that kind of affected the way that maybe your level of consideration for your younger siblings' like situation and how they might feel about the things that you say to them, even in passing, like little things. And I think that's just a beautiful thing to have between family members who are supportive of each other. Because in my family, right, I don't know if there's anybody who's queer. There's definitely not anybody who's out. I'm talking about my extended family, not including my in-laws, my brother's in-laws.
Yeah.
So I do have some queer folks on that side, which actually has been pretty helpful. Because my sister-in-law has a really great understanding of queer culture and queer communities. She's not queer herself, but I love that I have that understanding from that side of the family. But on my Korean side of the family, I just don't know anybody who is out or, you know, I have cousins who just really don't care that much that I am queer. But there's no one I can talk to about my experiences of transitioning medically, some of my concerns or just any kind of feelings or experiences I'm having. I can't directly speak to anybody in my family about that. And even though I'm out to my parents and my brother, I think other people are guessing. My cousins who see my stories on Instagram are like guessing, like, okay, something's up. But nobody's talking to me about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a precious thing to have a queer family member that at least you don't have to like censor yourself around in this way. Because, yeah, it's a big deal. Like, it's a big part of your identity. So, yeah, I think it's just really cool. Oh my gosh, I am talking so much. I think it's because you're a good listener. Yeah.
Thank you.
And also, I think this is a good example of how and why we talked for 4 hours the first time we met. Because we can just, like, keep going forever.
You know, that reminds me, like, you said that I'm a good listener. I haven't been a good listener since coming to Korea.
What do you mean?
Because in the United States, like, I don't know if there was space for me to talk about myself, but I also didn't think about myself, like, me as a person when I was in the United States. So I was often on the listening side. But since coming to Korea, like, I've been wanting to talk so much. Like, I'm not listening to anybody. Like, I'm just, like, me wanting to blurt out every moment. So, yes, me being a good listener hasn't happened in a few years.
Really? I feel like whenever we talk, you're a pretty good listener. I mean, you do also talk quite a bit.
Yeah, I do.
But I also feel like you listen quite well when I speak. Maybe it's because we have some things in common that we are interested in.
Yeah, that's true.
But I love that you can't stop talking. I relate to that experience, you know, to have people finally listening and you actually have opinions and thoughts about who you are as a person. And you want to communicate that. It's a wonderful thing. And it just feels like a process of finding your own vocabulary, whether it's in English or in Korean.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, really important. Earlier on, you said when people refer to me as Korean American, like, I didn't like that. I'm just a little curious to know, like, what do you mean by that?
I'm still not sure either.
Okay.
I think that's something I haven't pinpointed the reason why yet. But this is kind of like what I mentioned in the pre-interview, but I realized that I don't identify with the American part of that label. Yeah, when I was growing up, I knew I was Korean. Maybe because we spoke in Korean at home, but I had pretty firm, solid understanding of my Korean identity. but I never identified as American. I never felt any affinity or any connection with the US as a country or like just Americanness. And I realized that gap with other people who might identify as Korean American during one of those World Cup or Olympic events. My family and I would often watch the Korean games, the Korean soccer games, or maybe like for other sporting events like Korean athletes competing. But we never watched American competitions. We never watched the American teams compete at the World Cup.
Right.
But I would go to school and like the other kids, not just Korean, but other Asian American kids would watch these American games. And that just never occurred to me. I never thought about watching the American games.
Right.
Because it just wasn't something that I connected with. I think it was those moments that I realized, oh, I'm not American. And like, it just doesn't come to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like just working in the immigrant rights organization, people would, really firmly identify as Asian American, Korean American. They had a pride in that identity and I couldn't. I didn't want to speak English. I was speaking English for survival, right? It was my job. It was my only method of communication with the people around me. So it was my survival language. It's not something that I have any affection for.
Right.
So a lot of it again goes back to the language aspect of my identity. But English is just, I don't know, it's not a love-hate relationship. It's like a hate relationship with English. Yeah, like I don't know what it is. There's like,
it's like the parent that you don't want to stay in touch with, just don't want to see.
No, yeah, that's English.
No contact.
And maybe that's why in Korea right now I'm teaching English. I'm an English tutor. That's my way of making money in Korea. But I think that's why it's somewhat comfortable for me because it's like defined. I'm using English to make money. It's just for money making. Right. It's not anything more than that, and that's probably why I'm okay with speaking English when I'm tutoring, but I don't really want to speak it with other people when I'm like, like friendships or other relationships. Right. And the reason I can speak English with you now is because I have a firm foundation of trust and we have this friendship and I know that you're not going to judge me for whatever reason. So that's probably why I can speak English comfortably and there's no barrier. To that. Like there's no emotional barrier to this conversation. There's a vocabulary barrier, but not an emotional barrier.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just as a side note, I remember meeting somebody who was from a minority ethnic group in Russia. And so they speak 3 languages. They speak Russian, they speak their own ethnic language, and then they speak English. And I guess they are also learning Korea because they live here now.
Oh, okay.
But they were saying to me growing up, my ethnic cultures, my people's language is my emotional language. So that's the language I use with my family, and I can make so many jokes in this language that will never translate to any of the other languages I speak. And then with Russian, that's my intellectual language. So that's the language I use at school. It's a social language that I use to interact with the world. And then English is also an intellectual language, but I read very specific things in English, very technical things. So that also helps me learn. And we were speaking in English, so I guess there's that too. But then like Korean, I don't know what Korean is to this person. It was just so interesting to me to hear this person categorize the languages that they speak in these different ways, because I had never actually done that with Korean and English for myself before. And we have different backgrounds, but that helped me actually understand a little bit more, gave me a little bit more insight into what their upbringing, what their childhood was like, and what their identity might feel like to them. So yeah, language is like super powerful. It's really cool. You said that when you were growing up, you didn't have like a huge queer community around you, and like it was almost kind of by accident you discovered your queerness. Now you are in a relationship that most people would describe as queer. Would you describe it as a queer relationship?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just weird because like within the queer community, you don't say, I'm in a queer relationship. It's just a
I know,
relationship.
right? Oh yeah, that's true.
It's weird. But yeah, so you're in a like a same-sex partnership, and also you are pursuing actively your career in acting and, you know, filmmaking. So what is life like for you now as a queer person pursuing their dreams? Like, what is that reality like for you? And also, do you feel like you have more of a queer community around you now as opposed to before?
Well, to begin with, yeah, I am in a relationship now, and this might be probably is super cheesy, but it's like being with my best friend. Like, if everything fails, I have the one person I can trust, and I have the one person who I know won't judge me. And that gives me a humongous, this tremendous sense of power.
Okay.
Definitely like raises my self-confidence, my dignity, and all of that. And I want to be careful about this because it's not like you should find a relationship to, you know, like improve your self-worth. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that's not what's happening to me. But having a person, as a queer person, having another queer person, having a partnership, it changed my life in a lot of ways, in the sense of it impacting me as an individual. I don't know if I phrased this well, but
I think I understand. Having a person to really kind of be there for you, and you know you have this one person, and they kind of make you want to be better. It helps you grow, even though you're not in it to gain something.
Right.
That's just a natural byproduct of engaging in this relationship. I think probably people in healthy relationships, no matter what form it is, could relate to this.
Yeah.
Because it is a powerful thing to have someone say, you're valid, I see you, and I'm here for you. And you don't have to perform or like do anything or be anything specific to be important to me and to have worth as a person. And that is so motivating. So, yeah, if that's what you're talking about,
Yes, that's
I think that's just beautiful.
exactly what I wanted to say but could not express.
Okay, great. What about the career aspect of like following your dreams and learning a new craft in acting and filmmaking?
It's hard in that, I don't know what it's like for people in other arts fields, but it's hard to be proactive as an actor. There's only so much you can do. You can be proactive in building your monologues, building your audition portfolio. That you can spend a lot of time on improving, developing, but you have to be cast by somebody else, right? So there's only so much I can do.
Yes.
That's been difficult because I'm realizing actors are way powerless than I thought. Because, you know, when you watch a movie, the thing that you watch the most are the actors, right?
Yes.
Everything in the media is about actors and how powerful and wealthy they are, right? But
they seem very influential. Yeah.
right. In reality, that's not true. On set, you don't have much power. A lot of times you have to do what you're told.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, you can voice your suggestions. But that's often not true. You're just following directions, basically.
Yeah, especially as not blockbuster kind of, I
Right.
don't know, symbol of some kind, like a very well-known face.
And even if you are, you know, up there, you still have to follow the director, or you still have to follow.
Yeah.
There aren't things that you can do just because you're the actor. Yeah, so I'm realizing that there are a lot of limitations on how I can, you know, move my career forward.
I know. Like, I always wonder how actors handle that because it seems like such a stressful position to be in. I know that, like, creative fields often can be, you can be doing stuff, but you really have to be seen in order for your work to be validated. So how do you feel about that now?
I mean, now I think I've just kind of accepted it. So it doesn't seem like a big barrier because I'm just accepting that that's a part of the reality in this field. But there really isn't much actors can do on set because a lot of times at the end of the day, you're doing what the director wants for the director's project, right? And after it gets passed on to the editor, you have no idea what's going to happen in the editing room. It's like, it's beyond your power. But once I kind of accepted that, I think partially it was freeing for me because there's so little that I can control. It's just me being present and me doing what I can, doing the best that I can in the moment.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I have like no control over this project or how I'm going to be recorded in this project. But yeah, the hard thing is that like you said, you need visibility to have work, right, in the field, to have paying work in the field. And that's been difficult for me. So I've been tutoring a lot. This year, I didn't do much acting. I basically did like no acting, and I didn't really go on many film sets. I was just focusing on just trying to survive, right? Just trying to pay rent. But because I've only been acting about 4 years now, my training, my base was so shallow that me taking a year off like really damaged my acting.
You mean like quality-wise?
Yeah. And maybe down the road, if I have like years of a decade of experience, maybe resting for a year won't damage me as much because I'll have a greater depth of experience. But because what I had was so little, it just completely broke down. So next year, or not next year, like next week, but starting next week, I'm gonna start training again and focusing more, because the goal is to stop English tutoring, right? So that I can be a fully active actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just supporting you.
Thank you.
응원하다. Cheering you on, not supporting you. I'm not actually supporting you in any tangible way. I am watching the rough cut of your movie that you made.
Gosh.
That's like the support that I can offer you, giving you some feedback to whatever extent that you're looking for. And I do think that it's a scary thing to trust yourself and trust your passion and go after it. And I have a lot of admiration for people who, like you're just doing it. And I'm like, wow, how did I do that? Let me just study them. Yeah, I love that you're a creative person, and anytime that we've gotten together and talked about potential projects or just whatever you're working on, whatever I'm working on, yeah, it's just there's not a lot of judgment that goes on because we never say to each other or ourselves like, but that's never gonna make money. That's that's not gonna lead to like, worldly success according to mainstream society. Like that's not the point. And I just love that process. I love that kind of thinking.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I love seeing you live this out. So I'm hoping that you can do all those things. Quit your day job and actually pursue this full time. Oh, yes. You know the crush that you had on this other actor in the theater group when you first lived for a year in Korea.
Yeah.
Did you end up telling her about your feelings?
I did. Big mistake.
Okay, what happened?
Don't do that.
Why?
I learned.
What happened?
I don't know if it was when I first saw her or later on, but I had a sense that she was probably queer as well.
Okay. So before you realized you had queer feelings for her, you thought she was queer.
Yeah, I don't know if it was before or after, but
okay.
I kind of knew that she probably was queer. Like I just had the like the feeling.
Yeah, the gaydar was going off.
Yeah, I could just sense
the queerdar.
Right. I could just sense it, but I don't know. I think when I realized my feelings for her, I thought that if I tell her how I feel, and if she says that she doesn't want to be with me, it would be because she doesn't like me as a partner, not because she's homophobic. Like, I think I had that sense of unspoken understanding that that's what would happen, right?
It all comes back to 눈치.
Yeah. And a little later, she told me that she was bi. So, like, I had a clear coming out experience from her.
Like, totally unprompted, right? She just told you.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe her queerdar was going off, too.
Yeah, maybe. After I had that, like, established fact about her, I felt more comfortable to, like, tell her how I felt. And as I expected, she didn't like me. So it didn't happen. The relationship didn't happen.
Okay.
And in hindsight, I'm kind of glad it didn't because I don't think she was a great person.
Love it.
Yeah.
No, really, the universe sometimes watches out for us,
I think so.
It lets you understand certain things about yourself, but doesn't let you get, like, too deep with someone who's not good for you.
Yeah. I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful.
Relatable.
Relatable.
Yeah. I'm so happy that it didn't happen.
Thank you.
And you still got to tell her how you felt anyway. And you're right. Your instincts were right.
Yeah.
So now we get to my favorite part of the interview, which is what are your passions? What are you passionate about? But I feel like we've been talking about your passion.
Oh, yeah.
So let me change the question slightly. Why do you feel passionate about acting? What does it represent for you?
Oh, this is hard.
I know. I like to throw people these curveballs just to test them.
Because my background was in organizing, I guess because that was my first job as an adult, those experiences were very lasting memories for me. Mm-hmm. Because naturally, it's my first time out in society.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that I learned, that I felt from there, kind of just stick with me.
Yeah.
And because, like in a lot of social justice organizations, there's a clear good and bad. That's a bad politician. This person is on our side. That's a bad person.
Yeah.
I had a very, very strong black and white kind of thinking. Like, only if that person shares my values, like 100%, only if that person and I can, like, resonate 100%, then I like that person. Then that's a good person.
Right.
Everyone else is bad. I had a very, very concrete black and white way of thinking. But once I started acting, all of that just like melted down. And I think that experience of all that like hatred and, all the walls that I had up, all of that melting down was just life-changing for me. And that's partially why I can't let go of acting. After I started acting, I became so much softer of a person. Like, I don't have those barriers, I don't think. I don't know what other people think of me. But I don't have that, like, that hostility in me anymore.
Right.
Even if the person that I have to act with, even if the character that I have to play is nothing like me, even if they have like values or their behaviors are completely different from me, or I might disagree with it even.
Yeah.
I'm in the place in life where I can get along with that coworker, where I can get along with that character. And I think at the root of that is I am kind of at peace with myself.
Yeah.
And acting just helps me with that so much. Or it's not that it helps me, it's opened up those doors to me to completely change my thinking. And I think that's why I'm sticking with it.
That's wonderful. I like that answer. Yeah. My next question is, what brings you joy?
Right now?
Yeah. Well, let's say aside from acting, in your daily life, is there anything that brings you joy?
To be honest, acting does not bring me joy right now. Because
Okay.
my most recent project, I was so traumatized by my poor acting skill. So right now, it's definitely not my source of joy. But
Okay.
I think what gives me joy changes frequently, but these days it's just been watching lots of YouTube. What I watch on YouTube is interviews from other actors or interviews from like dancers. Like, I'm really into dance these days. If I say dance, it sounds very like, intellectual, not the art of dancing. Like, I've been watching Street Woman Fighter and I'm like completely obsessed.
Okay. Well, that's a form of art though, too.
It is art. But, like, I don't know, like, dance theory or anything. It's just, I'm just completely addicted.
Oh, yeah, I don't think most people...
No, if I say, like, oh, I'm into dance, it sounds so smart, but no, I don't really know anything about dancing. Just...
I will say, I was watching a video of somebody dancing, and I was so impressed. And I was like, wow, I think I could really get into dancing. And I had the exact same thought, but I don't know anything about theoretical side of it. I never studied dancing. I don't know what it's called, but I do know what I like. And it's not a particular form of dancing. I like individual dancers, and I tend to follow them. It doesn't matter what kind of dance they do. So I'm really into a break dancer. I've been following him for like years and years and years. I know nothing about break dancing. I still don't know like how people win dance battles and stuff, but I just think the way he dances is beautiful. And, and then I'll follow like a salsa dancer or, I don't know, bachata or, or K-pop dancing. I'm like, wow, this person is amazing. Anyway, that's just to say that I am also a cultural newbie. You don't need to know all this complicated stuff to enjoy dance.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. Like, I don't know much about dance, but it just really gives me joy to watch dancers these days. I think that's where I'm at.
Awesome. When life gets a little bit hectic, is there anything you do to center yourself and feel a bit more at peace?
I haven't been doing it these days, but typically I think doing yoga It's probably the 1 hour in my day that I can actually not think about anything.
Yeah. You used to also do aerial yoga for a little bit.
I actually started with aerial yoga and then I learned other traditional forms of yoga.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference?
For all yoga, I think the teacher is so important. I don't think it's the form of yoga. I think it's the teacher. So I actually haven't done aerial in a while because I couldn't find a teacher that I really connect with. Mm-hmm. Just any yoga, any teacher I can connect with.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And the next one is, what are you most excited about these days?
I booked the tickets for Street Woman Fighter.
Oh, nice.
I'm just waiting for the concert day. That's all. That's like the only thing in my life that I'm living for right now.
Yeah, no, I get that. That's cool. Yeah. That's cool.
I booked them like 2 months ago. Oh, maybe a month ago. They came out a while ago.
Okay.
And they almost sold out immediately. So I booked the tickets a while ago.
Ticketing.
Yes, that.
Bloody ticketing.
It was very competitive. The show I booked for is like right before Christmas. I think it's like a day or two before Christmas. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's my first time going to a dance concert, you know? Like I've seen dancers on stage, but not like a full dance concert. So I'm excited.
Sounds amazing. Are you going with your partner?
Oh no, I'm going by myself. And that's probably going to be weird because everyone's going to be dancing with their friends, me all alone. But that's fine.
You can dance by yourself. Nobody will be able to tell. It's okay. You'll be moving. Smile at everybody.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I hope you have fun. And to end all of this lovely discussion, and you're sharing pretty much your entire life with us, I always have to ask, what is your favorite drink?
This is hard. I saw this on the question list, but it's hard.
So you're drinking tea today. Mm-hmm.
Today I drink tea. I loved coffee. I didn't use coffee to caffeinate myself. I just really like the taste of coffee. But I'm realizing that it might not be good for my health.
Right.
And I realized that once I had like a 1 week period where I didn't drink any coffee. And then I tried coffee and I realized some health effects. Mm-hmm. So I stopped drinking it. So right now, what drink do I like? I guess I like barley tea. Do you know porita?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Porita, of course. I have discussed barley tea on this show before. It's been mentioned.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
It's the quintessential Korean drink, I would say.
I think so.
If you grow up in a Korean household, your grandma, your grandparents will make some for you.
Right.
There's always a batch of it somewhere. I feel like it's a very traditional cultural thing. Mm-hmm. And it's really good for you too. Like, it's so great for your digestive system. And that's my dad's go-to drink these days, just warm porita.
Oh, really?
Especially in winter times. Yeah. Apparently it's good for your system, just like overall.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It must be like a Korean people super drink. You know, like instead of kombucha, we have porita.
Oh, yeah. I think so.
I remember actually that time you came to Pyuda and you met my dad. You brought some kind of tea that my dad really liked.
I brought red bean water.
Yeah, red bean tea. My dad loves red beans, and he was like so happy.
I remember that. I was like, oh, somebody else also likes red beans as much as me. I was so happy.
Yeah. You're the same like zodiac sign as my dad.
Oh, really?
You have the same initials as my dad too. Your names.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh.
So my dad, he really likes you. He met you that one time, and he sometimes still asks about you. He's like, oh, how is she doing? And I'm like, good. She's like in love with her partner, who's a woman. And he's like, oh, okay. So she's also one of your queer friends. And I was like, yes, Dad. All my friends are my queer friends. Yeah, so he likes you. Anyway, look how much we can bond over some drinks.
Oh, okay. Very good.
You know, that's why I like talking about it. I like talking about food and drinks because it can connect us. Yeah. Did you have barley tea growing up?
A little bit. When I was super young, I think my grandma made a lot of it. But later on, I don't think I had much of it. Like, it's been recent. Like 2 months ago, I suddenly got hooked on barley tea, and I've just been drinking it nonstop.
Okay, good. Yeah. I drink a lot of barley tea too. It's just the best thing. In the middle of the night when you're thirsty, I'm just like, barley tea.
Oh, yeah.
I'll down like an entire cup.
Thirst quench.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing your recently found love of barley tea and
Thank you.
everything else in between. I really, 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 really feel so happy that you were able to join us at our coffee shop AU.
Thank you.
And did you have a good time?
I did. Yes, I really
Good.
did. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad. So if you have questions or thoughts or feedback or whatever, if you just want to share your story, we're open. DM us on Instagram, email us. It's all going to be in the episode description. And thank you again so much for sharing yourself with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for spending time with me. Bye.
Bye.